students. This time I am going to take into account a very important poem named Ode to a Nightingale with a special reference to literary device that John Keats has used in this particular poem. We know that literary device depends on the mood, temperament of the poet, and the theme that he has proposed in the poem. So, there is no unilateral way by which a poet is going to choose his literary device. There are some considerations in the mind of the poet before finally he selects literary device for the poetic form. So here Dr. Naveen Kumar Jha presenting literary device that the poet John Keats has used into the present poem Ode to a Nightingale. We know that simile is a very common form of figure of speech that almost all poets use in their composition. We know that it is the very common way of making comparison between two dissimilar things to create a kind of definite idea in the mind of the reader. It is just to resolve the puzzle in the mind of the poet, or it is just to enhance the range of thought that the poet has to express that he uses simile. In this particular poem, we find that the speaker's mood is compared to a drowsy numbness full of aches and pains. It is similar to the intoxicated feeling due to ingesting hemlock, a toxic plant, or opiates or opium and heroin. Now we find here that the drowsy numbness is all similar with the speaker's mood, and it is all due to the intoxicated hemlock, hemlock which has been responsible for. We can say that the poet tries to avoid pains and aches that he faces in the world. So he is going to make his sensibility blunt by being in the stage of drowsy numbness. So it is a very good simile that the poet has expressed to compare his mind and mood to a drowsy numbness, which is all because of the use of the just a hemlock and something like that. Now we are just moving to another common figure of speech that the poet uses into his poem, because this is all about the sound effect that the poet tries to create through repetition of the vowel and consonant sounds. It is just the repetition of consonant and vowel sounds that has a very much rhythmic effect on the mind of the listener, and it also makes prose different from poetry. Here in project language, the writer does not feel it essential to repeat the same sound, but here when we are going to repeat the same sound, it has a very musical and harmonious effect on the mind of the reader. Now, the sound that is repeated is all for the purpose that the poet tries to serve. Here in this poem, we can say that the poet uses alliteration by which the soft mo, no, so, lo, and d sound in the opening four lines are repeated to give drunken and drowsy atmosphere. We can read here the stanza, and we can find that these sounds have been repeated, and the poet tries to create a drowsy atmosphere by repetition of that sound. That has been the purpose behind using that technique in the mind of John Keats. So my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains. Here you find so sound is repeated in X in drowsy, and no sound is repeated in and uh, just numbness and in pains. And so my sins, as though of hemlock, I had drunk. Here we find so in sense and as is repeated, and we find that we have the repetition of mo sound in my and hemlock, and we also find that do sound is repeated or imparted some dull opiate to the drains. One minute passed, and Lethe was had sung. So here the sounds that we have just mentioned belong to consonant, and they are repeated, and the poet has just realized the purpose that he has set in his mind. In line 15, we find that there is an alliteration on the bright bow sound. Now we can read, "Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful Hippocraean, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim." So, in almost all three lines, bow sound is repeated, like in beaker, blastful, brim, beaded bubbles, and so on. So this has just been for the effect of creating a kind of just uh, just a rhythm into the stanza. Here we can take another example of alliteration by which a fa sound has been repeated into the second stanza and into the start of the third stanza as well. So, and with thee fade away into the forest dim, fade far away, dissolve and quite forget. Now, we may go to the next device that the poet has used, namely allusion, by which the poet is just citing something, taking resort to some classical base. Now, here we have an allusion to Lethe. You know, here the poet is concerned about death and decay, or time and impermanence. These are the major themes that the poet has raised in this poem. And because just we are painful, we need to drink very much water from Lethe to invite forgetfulness. So Lethe is is the river in the ancient Greek mythological underworld. And we also find that its water is said to annihilate the drinker's memory. So the poet tries to just make his memory just blunt, because he does not want to live into the real world where there is a suffering, pain, and aches, or death, decay, time, and impermanence. These are the real concerns that the poet is facing and we too are facing. So, naturally, these are torturous experiences, and we are not always ready to go through these torturous experiences. So, most often we try to forget all the torturous and painful feelings that we have faced in our lives. And most often you find that we are in the world where there is hardly a moment of happiness. We are just not going to get a moment or so to be into the happy mood and conditions. Yes, it is just for a few moments that Nightingale has sung and the poet is in pleasure. But it is gone the moment the nightingale flies away. So once again, the same sort of trouble and troublesome situation is just before the poet that he mentally is not ready to face. So here he has cited an allusion to Lidi, and here we have already mentioned the significance of that ancient Greek mythological underworld river. And so we also find that Lidi means oblivion, forgetfulness. That is very much an essential kind of just mental strategy which has been just gifted to us to make our mind soothe, to make our mind less in trouble. Now, we all also find that this particular work that we are talking is written into the ode form. We find that here ode has been written, and here we find that this is a very much verse form which dates back to the ancient Greece. And generally, we find that ode is the short version of the composition against which John Keats' ode that we are discussing is of 8 stanzas of 10 lines apiece. So it is described to be the longest ode. Now we can take the stanza wise thematic discussion of this particular ode. So the very first stanza is lighting on the speaker's drowsy numbness. It is all because of beauty of the nightingale song. So it is the source of pleasure which makes our mind totally fall into a kind of drowsy numbness, where we are into the very much sleeping condition, where we listen nothing and nothing but the very beautiful song of the nightingale. So it has a very much intoxicating effect. Art too is very much intoxicating in its result. We try to just read poem and story, and we try to see painting because it just consoles our mind. It makes our mind fall into the peace and tranquility that we enjoy during our drowsy numbness or sleeping condition. Now, the second stanza is the speaker's longing for intoxication to deem speaker's sense and conscious mind. consciously we cannot live in this world for long, because we face lots of problems. And if we are always conscious and thoughtful to the problems that we face, we simply hardly manage our mental balance. So we just try to just make our sense dim for some time. We can say speakers senses and conscious mind should be made dim, that just they could adjust to the day-to-day situation. Now, coming to the third stanza, we find that as this human world is full of suffering, so it has been the general tendency, including of the poet, to escape the very much situation. We do not want it is just like boiling water in which a frog has been left to survive. And we find when a frog is kept into the boiling water, it tries to let it out from that just a hot pot. So similar is the mental condition of the poet and the just human beings, and we find that we want to be out of the just what we can call painful world, and it is either by living into the world of intoxication or into the world of beauty which is created by Nightingale here. Now here the stanza 4 is a vital shift. You know, we find that poetry can bring about comfort. When we are living into this very much suffering world, we find that we take resort to poetry, or the poet thinks to write poem is the way by which he can avoid the suffering pain of the suffering world. So it is a kind of vital shift. We simply cannot live into the intoxicating world, and we find that here there is another parallel world, that is the world of creation of art. And here the poet tries to create poem to just avoid or to bring comfort to the suffering mind. Now, here you find in the stanza 5 that there is a rich and sensuous vision of the forest through beautiful imagery. And you find that, yes, it is all a kind of spring season that we see, bringing out lots of natural changes. And here we find that nature is also just working out our pains and sufferings. And so it is all the sensuous vision that the poet is presenting to just give comfort to our suffering mind and so on. And we find that sensuousness is a way of forgetting the pain and tortures of our mind. So, most often it is a kind of negative idea. We can generally criticize a person taking resort to the sensuous world, saying that, okay, just to make our organs please, spiritually speaking, not just allowed, but all the physical existences are due to the balance and harmony into the organs as well. So eyes need something beautiful, just ears need something beautiful sound, and so on. So they are just going to just uh, chew what is the beautiful thing in this world, and by chewing the beautiful thing, we find that we get fresh, and we get power to live our life. So it is here that the poet is going to just make stanza 5 full with rich and sensuous vision. Now, it is into stanza 6 that we find that the poet is falling, his mind is falling into darkness again, because we find that there is no constant, or there is no what we can call a particular kind of mindset in which we can always live. It is not possible for a human being to live into the particular kind of mindset. So we find that our mind is fluctuating, and it is going from one point to another. Here also we find that into stanza 5, the poet just was almost happy to describe a rich and sensuous thing. But here, coming to the stanza 6, once again, he is under the darkness. Now, here into stanza 7, just once again, you find that it is the unchanging nature of the Nightingale song, which has been heard by generations, and it is the same song which has been heard by the poet also. And once again, the poet is into the world of ecstasy and happiness. And stanza 8, here the poet is once again back to the same pain when the temporary beauty and solace of the nightingale has fled. So he says that the beautiful thing has a temporary existence, that it lives only for short time in our life. Okay, it is all just physically explained, but it has a very deep a spiritual significance that we can live under the influence of that song forever. So it is just by a spiritual absorption of the beauty that we can be into that stage. But physically speaking, we can say that it has the temporary existence. So just our happiness is also not permanent. And the poet has seen the varying mood through the stanzas, which are just applied to all the human beings living in this world. Now, we already know that the poet is known for his negative capability, and we generally find that it is found into the tone of the poem, that it is searching and melancholic. And we find that here in negative capability, it is the artist's ability to strive for beauty over philosophical certainty. We find that it is a kind of search that the poet is making philosophically. And we find that there are intellectual confusion in this world. Intellectually, we find that we are in a mess, but it is all our philosophical vision which can make us out of this intellectual confusion, and we can enjoy the beauty of the life. So the poem ends not with a statement but with a rhetorical question. That rhetorical question is just always present. No matter how deeply we are thinking, that is one question which remains unanswered. Here is also one question that is unanswered, whether the speaker's experience was real or the poet was in a kind of illusion. The poet himself does not know the life we are spending is just a kind of real life or a kind of illusion that we are living. So, Indian philosophy has been stressing on the illusion of the life, and we also find that whatever we are seeing all around us is just the illusions. They are not real. And Plato has also said that this is far away from the truth. What we see and perceive is far away from the truth. And so Keats developed his old form, because just the established forms do not suit what he wanted to do. So I have earlier said that the poet has his own choice to choose that could reveal the facts, the mood, the temperament of the poet that he is just going to express into the work. Now we find here also that so far as meter is concerned, there is no one regular meter in which the whole poem has been written, but we can say that most part of the poem has been written into iambic pentameter. There are five just poetic feet per line, with on stress beat pattern. So we can talk about line 2, my sins, as though of hemlock I had drunk. So here we find that uh, the line has been divided into 5 feet, and each foot is going to contain two syllabi. First being the unstressed, second being the stressed. And now elsewhere we can find trochee, pattern of meter. That is, the pattern is a stressed, unstressed against iambic. So here it is the focus on just speakers aching heart. My heart acts and draw G numbness pains. So here find that it is into pentameter feet, but the meter is tricky because here pattern is followed in a stressed unstressed pattern. Now we can see there is a variations in the meter in line 10, that is singest of some marine full-throated is. So we also just come across ambient trimeter just into just 3 feet, or in line 8 we can find ambient trimeter in some melodious plot. Here there are 3 feet, and we find it is followed into on stress pattern. Line 16 has a missing syllable at the end. Example, and purple stained mouth. Here we find it is trimeter, but the last foot has just one syllable. One is missing. In line 28, we find that and danced eyed despairs. So it is all about the meter that we can find in this poem the poet has used. And lastly, we can see the rhyme scheme throughout the poem is regular. Each of its 10 line stanza follows the pattern A B A B C D E C D E, or it is in this way we can just talk about the very much literary device that the poet has used in this particular poem, and we can say that we have largely discussed the matter that we have undertaken. Thank you.